Alright, in this video I'm going to explain what a chord inversion is. Now some of you may think you know what a chord inversion is, and maybe you do know, but there is actually two definitions to really a chord inversion. And a lot of times we mix up the word chord inversion and voicing. So I'm really going to try and explain the difference between those two. But let's start with the basic of what a chord inversion is. Now before we even get into that, let's just explain a chord, right? A chord is when you start on a note and you go up in intervals of thirds. So you have a root note, a third, and a fifth. This is called a third because it's a third above the root. This is called a fifth because it's a fifth above the root. So this is called a root position chord. This is a C major chord. The reason it's major is because of the E. If we wanted to make it minor, we make it an E flat, but it's still a third. This is a minor third, major third. That is really what determines a chord. Now let's get into the idea of an inversion. So an inversion is when we say we're going to change the order of the notes. We're still going to use the C, the E, and the G. We're just going to change which order they're in. So this would be called a first inversion. The way you create a first inversion is you start in a root position, you take the bottom note, the root, and you bring it to the top. So now the order of the chord is third, fifth, root. So we have the root on top, the third on the bottom. That is what makes it a first inversion. This is also known as a 6-3 chord. The reason is because this note is now a 6 above the bottom note, and this is now a third above the bottom note. So this is our first inversion. We want to invert it again, bring the E up top. Now G, our fifth of the chord, is on the bottom. G, C, E. Still using all three of the C chord notes. It's still a C chord, just a second inversion. So those are our three ways we can play a triad, right? A normal three-note chord. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. So a lot of times, though, when we're playing chords, we're going to play that in our right hand. Right? Let's just say I wanted to play a first inversion chord in my right hand. That's what I'm doing. But now, if in my left hand I'm playing a C down here, you would no longer consider this to be a first inversion chord. It would be considered root position because your absolute bottom note, your lowest note, is a C. So that is not inverted. So even though this is inverted, you wouldn't call this a first inversion chord. You would say it's a C chord, root position. What you have changed here, what we would call this, is the voicing. Each note, the E, the G, and the C that are part of the chord, are all considered their own voice. E is its own voice, G is its own voice, C is its own voice. By choosing the order of those notes in the right hand, or towards the higher part of the piano, right, we're changing the voicing. Which note goes on top, right? This will sound different than this, right? We didn't change the notes, it's the same notes, the same note on the bottom. What we're changing is which voice is on top, which is in the middle, and which is on the bottom, right? So that's all the same chord. It's all a C chord, just I'm changing the voicing of the C chord. So that is really the difference that we have between an inversion and a voicing. They're related. We use the inversions to create our voicings, but if we're really talking about inversions, the bottom note is what makes the difference. Because for example, let's say we have a root position C chord in my right hand, but then I put an E in the bass. Now we have a first inversion C chord. Harmonically, we would say this is first inversion because the lowest note is the E, which is the third. So no matter what voicing I'm in here, this is still going to be a first inversion C chord, first inversion C chord, first inversion C chord. And now that definitely has a different sound, right? Here's a C chord, root position in right hand and with the bass note C. Sounds different, right? Then, because now we're creating a different bass, we're creating a different harmony for this. Right? So that is really the difference here in the inversion. So what you really want to do is you want to learn all the chords and all their inversions. Obviously that sounds like a lot, and I don't recommend practicing it all at once. I recommend sticking with one chord, its major and minor version, and just practicing those over and over again in both hands. So starting in root position, I'm playing the same chord, C, E, G, just with both hands. Then I'll move into a first inversion, then a second inversion, back to a first inversion, and back to root position. And this is a great exercise to practice playing your inversions with both hands up and down the keyboard. Right, so the goal is to build speed. However, we don't start off playing it fast. If we're new to it, we want to go slowly. A nice, slow, easy way, get our fingers set, figure out which fingers we're going to use. Same idea. So once we've done that with the major, then we can do it with the minor. So I'll just work on just the major and the minor with that same pattern, that same exercise, to work on that for maybe a few days, maybe a week, and then I'll move on to another one. So then we can go to D major, and then D minor. And that is going to be the best way to practice these in every key. Practice each one, major and the minor version, C major, C minor, for a week, D major, D minor, and really get them down and really get comfortable recognizing the positions and knowing which note on bottom makes it a first inversion, which makes it a second inversion, and so on. I'm not going to get too detailed into voicing on this. Voicing is a long concept in its own thing. To really choose which voice you want to use has to do with something called voice leading, which I will get into in another lesson. So I hope you enjoyed this video on inversions, and thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, comment with other videos you'd like to see, or as always, if you have questions about this video or other videos, you can always email me, digitalpianoschool@gmail.com.